What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. I'm Kevin Smith. Today's episode is going to be more of a single topic episode with a lot of different things embedded in it. The other day, I made a post on advice that I would give to myself if I was a 21-year-old 18 X-ray or Special Forces candidate going back through the experience. I made it 35 things. It's really 36 things, but because I'm 35 years old and I was giving it to myself about 14 years ago, I decided to make it 35, but 35 had an A and a B, so really it's 36 things. And so today I'm just going to go over each one. It might be a part one and a part two series, just depending on how long I talk about certain things. But I'm going to go over each one and get a little bit more in-depth and granular with them. Not crazy in depth. I'm not going to give them full explanations. I like to get through all 35 in an hour and a half or less, in which case I'll probably just make it one episode, but it might be two, but we'll see how long it goes. And I'm kind of just going to talk about a few things that I meant by it. I got some follow-up questions. This is what I usually do when I make posts that get tons of engagement. I usually turn them into single topic episodes. And this one I posted 2 days ago and it's already got almost 1,000 likes and lots of comments, lots of shares, gained some followers from it. So I think it was something that fit the bill for a full episode. And I think it's got a lot of good, solid information, whether you're an 18 X-ray or not. Obviously, some of these things apply a little bit more to 18 X-rays, but they really just apply to young individuals that are pursuing a career in SOF. Or honestly, a lot of them apply to people who just want to be fit for long periods of time. And other ones apply to just people who want to go chase big things in life. They're not all Special Forces specific. In fact, a lot of them aren't, but some of them kind of just tie back to what my career path was. And by the way, if you wanted to hear more about my career path and the things I did right before the Army that kind of led to joining the Army, going through basic training, airborne school, selection, the Q course, etc., you can go listen to episode 120. And I explained that quite in depth. So I will apologize beforehand. I'm coming off being very sick. I was down and out for the last few days. I haven't trained in like 5 days. I'm just starting to feel like I can sit up for a full day and work and talk to the camera, and let alone just do basic adult functions. I have not, like I said, I haven't gone to the gym today is Wednesday. I haven't gone to the gym since last Thursday, and I did a run on Friday, and then basically Friday evening, I started feeling terrible. Saturday was by far the worst. I didn't get out of bed till 2:30 p.m. For reference, I usually get out of bed at 4 a.m. and I'm done working by 2:30 p.m. So that was a bad day. Sunday wasn't much better, a little bit better. I was able to get out of bed and actually like sit up and read. And then Monday, Tuesday, I've started to get back on the mend. But you guys can probably notice that my voice is nasally and I hate the sound of it. So hopefully it's not that you hate the sound of it too much and you still get some good stuff out of this episode. So far, one of the main things that really crushed me with this sickness, whatever it was, is my loss in appetite. So I am down, let's see, Thursday was the last time I weighed myself, last Thursday. So 6 days ago, I was 199 pounds in the morning before eating or drinking anything. And this morning I was 192.7. So I've lost quite a bit of weight, which is typically the case when I get sick. I just lose my appetite. Usually I don't get sick often, very infrequently. Maybe once every 18 months I'll get sick, sometimes even less than that. But when it does hit me, it hits me like a sack of bricks. And that's what happened this time. But either way, apologies in advance for the nasaliness, but it's getting better and we are hopefully on the back end of it. I have felt like I can eat. The last 24 hours or so, I've felt like my appetite's mostly back, and I hopefully will be able to go back and train tomorrow. One of the things I used to, like back in the day, I would have absolutely already tried to go and train, but I have learned my lesson that going and training when you're sick, especially when it's systemic, like my heart rate was, on the worst days, it was 19. So Saturday morning, it was 19 beats per minute higher. It's usually 46 to 47, and it was 65. So very high. The next day it was 63. The next day it was 60. And now it's back in the 40s. So I believe I'm over it, but who knows what will happen. So anyway, let's hop into it. I'm just going to go through each one. Some of them I might talk about very briefly. Other ones might be a little bit more in depth. it'll just kind of be whatever I feel is right for that individual one. So the first one is, these aren't in order by significance either, and they're not in order. Some of them are training specific, other ones are nutrition, other ones are lifestyle, other ones are like character development and self-development, and they're not in order. So it's going to be a little bit jumping back and forth. I just came up with these off the top of my head in order and just sent it. So either way, let's get into it. One is, you are doing enough. Training more will only detract from your progress. So something that I have dealt with for a really long time is never thinking that I'm doing enough, whether it's on physical training or whether it's work-wise, whether it's really anything in life. I always feel like I could do more. And fact is, you always could do more, but there comes a point of diminishing returns, whether it's fitness or elsewhere. And fitness especially has a point of diminishing returns. And in fact, when you cross that too often in fitness, you start to go backwards, or you hurt yourself, or you have some sort of nagging overuse injury or something along those lines. So there comes a point where doing more is not going to serve you anymore. I used to have very, very good recovery. I've always been more endurance prone than strength prone. And usually, generally, people who have solid endurance backgrounds or genetics for endurance can recover a lot better and handle more volume than a lot of other people. So I've always been able to train a lot more than some other people that I know. And I definitely embodied this back when I was 21 years old, going into the Army as an 18 X-ray. I trained like a madman, definitely more than I needed to, more than what was beneficial for me. I would have probably 100% gotten better results if I had focused on quality over quantity a little more. I just didn't really know any better. And I didn't understand fully the difference between training more just to train more and training more, but also recovering from it and making progress because you are actually recovering from it. Your training is actually serving you in a good way. So this is something that a lot of people with, for lack of a better way to put it, type A personalities, people who are very driven, high achievers, people who know that hard work is something that is, no matter what, they're going to be able to fall back on. If all else fails, I can just work harder. That works for some things, and it's a good attitude to have. And to be honest, most people who are successful in special operations have type A personalities, but it can also be a double-edged sword because there comes a point where more work is not better. And learning that point it's individual. It's different for everyone. But generally, if you are training several times per day, or if you're training twice a day and you're training 5-6 days a week, or if you are really not taking rest days, or if you're training for hours and hours per day, most likely, if you are not making progress, it's not because you're doing too little. It's usually going to be something different. Either you need to do less and higher quality training, or you need to maybe stay where you're at, but also focus on higher quality training. In most cases, it's the former. So you need to detract from some things, cut some fat, and do higher quality training. So that's number one. Number two, barbell squats grind your shoulders. Here, try this safety bar. You'll thank me in a decade. Yeah, so I do not necessarily have the greatest anatomy for barbell back squats. And I used to barbell back squat low bar. And for those who are experienced with that, you know that it requires a good amount of shoulder external rotation, shoulder mobility, upper back mobility to hold the bar in place and be able to do it and continue to do it without it banging up your upper body. We're not even talking lower body. We're talking upper body. I used to grind through barbell low bar squats a lot because it was one of my better lifts. I actually got pretty good at a barbell low bar squat. This was later on in my Q course career. This wasn't right when I first started, but either way, I kept doing it because I kept getting stronger and I was following kind of like a powerlifting, a little bit like my current program, Jack Gazelle, powerlifting / muscle building / endurance building training split. And I sometimes could get away with it for weeks on end. My shoulders wouldn't feel that bad, but usually I would hit a lower body back squat, a lower body session with a back squat on Monday. And Tuesday I would hit my push day, my push and pull upper body day. And I found that after a while, sometimes my shoulders were just bothering me going into that session. So my squats the day before were detracting from my other training later that week, my upper body training. So it took me a while to kind of figure out, because I was a big time purist. I was just wrapped around the whole idea, because that was more of a thing at the time. The idea that if you don't use a barbell, then you are impure and you're not a real lifter. And if you use a safety bar, if you use machines, God forbid, there's some more stuff on machines in here. But if you use those things, then you are cheating in some way, shape, or form. And that's not the case. If you are back squatting and it bangs your upper body up and you don't have to back squat for your sport. So if you're not a power lifter or maybe a CrossFitter, those are maybe a strongman. I don't think strongmen really do much back squatting in competition. If you're anyone but those athletes, then you don't have to squat with a barbell on your back. You should absolutely do a squat movement. You should overload it. You absolutely should get stronger in the squat, but it can be with a safety bar, and it can even be, God forbid, with a machine if you want, and you're going to be totally fine. You're not going to become less athletic. You're probably going to feel better, and you're going to get just as strong, and also it's not going to interfere with your upper body training. So don't be bashful, and that's not just for your upper body. Anytime you run into an exercise that bangs up any part of your body, whether it's the opposite part of the body you're training, like squats banging up your upper body, or whether it is the actual part of the body you're training, like if you do squats and it bangs up your knees, then I suggest finding an alternative, because training through pain is totally not worth it, especially when you don't have to do that movement. You can make that movement work for you by working on your mobility, working on your technique, dropping the ego, etc. But generally speaking, sometimes it's better to just find an alternative and go with that. So I wish I had done that sooner. And now I haven't barbell squatted in a while, and my upper body feels great, and so do my legs. So number 3, your bench press 1RM is not tested at selection. Just be sure to train and overload the push pattern. Yeah, so I see this a lot on Reddit as well as other places on the internet, where people claim that you have to have a certain bench press, 1 rep max bench press or 5 rep max bench press. Not just the bench press, other lifts as well, but we're talking bench press here. And that's not the case. And I personally was never a very good bencher, and I was always kind of ashamed of it. I always had a poverty bench, I call it. And my body type is just not great for benching. It usually, when you're good at deadlifting, which deadlift's by far my best lift, usually that type of anatomy, long arms, kind of a little bit thin chest, skinny arms, bench press is mostly tricep and front delt movement for me, more so than a chest movement. Typically, when you're built like that, the bench is not going to be a very strong lift, and oftentimes it's not going to make your shoulders feel great. If it does, and you enjoy benching, even if it's not strong, you can absolutely bench. And I'm talking with a barbell, straight bar bench. If not, just like the squat, you don't have to do it. Your bench press is not tested at selection. The only things that should be standardized when it comes to getting prepped for selection should be the things that you're actually going to be tested on while you're there. Your ruck times, your run times, your calisthenics abilities, your grip strength, grip endurance, things like that. There's no real great standard for grip endurance, but you definitely want to train that quite significantly when you go to selection, because you're going to be carrying stuff for a long period of time. It's not like a hard and fast test, but those with poor grip strength, endurance don't really fare very well during team week. So as long as you are choosing a pressing exercise, a horizontal pressing exercise, or 2 or 3 or 4, that you can load very well and that you can progress really well and that don't bang you up, and you're getting stronger, then you're going to be good to go. If you can't bench press 1.5, 2 times your body weight, but you can do a weighted dip with 3 plates, then guess what? You are strong enough. You're a strong enough presser to be good for selection. So don't feel like you have to do the bench press or really any other gym lift that is not a tested calisthenic in order to be prepared for selection. So just remember that. Number 4, your deadlift 1RM is not tested at selection. You should still hinge, but what is your 5-mile time? Another example of lifts that are not tested at selection, lifts that I see standardized all across the internet by other people. What's your deadlift? What's your squat? What's your bench press? What's your overhead press, etc. And all those are good proxies for strength. You don't have to deadlift at all. You don't have to do a straight bar deadlift with a barbell from the floor, conventional, at all in your selection prep, even in your life, unless you want to be a powerlifter or a strongman, maybe. That's it. So even though the deadlift is a really good lift for me, and when I do it appropriately and rotate it out of my program periodically, and I am reasonable with my programming, it is a lift that doesn't bang me up all that much. I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody. Actually, for more people than not, that is the case. But it still didn't matter, and it still doesn't matter to this day. So you want to be focused on, again, the things that are tested, and ask yourself, what's your 5-mile time? You should still hinge, like I said in the actual piece of advice. You should still do some sort of deadlift variation, whether it's an RDL, single leg RDL, stiff-legged deadlift, deadlift off blocks, a hex bar deadlift, a good morning, a 45-degree back raise, or a combination of those things. But it does not have to be a deadlift, and your 1RM does not matter. Number 5, being an athlete is great, sustained, but what are your character flaws and what's your plan to bring them up? I had someone inquire about this in the comments. Could you be a little bit more detailed about number 5? And one of the main things that they test at selection is your character. One of the main things they're assessing is your character. This is another one that, although there's the RSOF attributes, those are kind of the standards. They're a little bit more subjective than objective. But being a good dude, which you've probably seen if you've been following really any person who puts information out like this, or if you've been on any Reddit forum, especially the Green Beret Reddit forum, you've probably seen like the best way to get through team week is to just be a good dude. And that's true, but there is a little bit more to being a good dude. And although it would take me probably an entire episode to talk about how to build your character, and I'll probably do that in the future, it is very important that you, identify your character flaws. And the best way to do that usually is not just ask yourself what your character flaws are. Usually it's to ask somebody else that spends a lot of time with you, that is willing to be honest and give it to you straight and tell you kind of what you suck at as a human. And then after you identify, that's big step number 1. Takes a lot of humility and it takes a lot of courage to identify what you suck at, but it's super important. After that, you find resources and ways to bring them up. And then also you go out and put yourself in uncomfortable situations in order to practice bringing them up. Knowing what your character flaws are, that's one thing. Knowing how to fix them is another thing, but actually fixing them takes action and being put in uncomfortable situations. And I'm going to get to one pretty soon. That's going to be an example of some things that I struggled with and that I have worked on over time to bring up. So your physical fitness is great. If you're a former athlete, awesome. That's huge. It's non-negotiable. You're not going to get through selection if you're not physically fit and somewhat athletic, at least. You don't have to be a superstar at all by any means, but you do have to be fit. It helps to be relatively athletic, of course, but you also have to have very strong character. It is incredibly important, and it's probably the most important behind physical fitness over skills. And of course, you have to have enough skills to pass the tests. You have to be intelligent enough. Intellect is another one. You have to be intelligent enough to pass the tests and get a good enough GT score just to go to selection. You have to be intelligent enough to find your way out around in land nav and get your points. And you have to be intelligent enough to get through team week. But character is huge. Character will carry you through team week. And it's not just important for team week. It's important for day 1 all the way through day 21. And then it's important, even more important, the Q course. It's even more important as you continue in group. So it's this never ending thing that you want to work on. Number 6, do strength and conditioning separately most of the time. Stop doing cardio with weights. So I used to be a big time circuit trainer. I would do a lot of conditioning. I would do a lot of running in particular. I was a big runner. And I would also in the gym think that if I combined a cardio component into my strength training, then I could get the best of both worlds. While this is okay to do sometimes, like occasionally in your training, like Metcons or circuits or giant sets, whatever it may be, it's not the best thing to do on a regular basis. You're not getting the best of both worlds. You're actually getting a subpar stimulus for both adaptations. So if you try to strength train, combine it with cardio by resting short periods of time or doing jump ropes or burpees in between sets or doing, again, CrossFit Metcons or something like that, not the end of the world to do sometimes, but you're not getting the same strength stimulus. You're not getting the same cardio stimulus, conditioning stimulus as you could if you separate them. You can do them in the same session, like back to back. You could do a strength workout followed by a conditioning workout, or you could do them at different times a day, and that's totally fine. But if you're trying to send your body those mixed signals and they're essentially the opposite signals to one another, and they're as close to the opposite signals as you can. That's why it's hard to improve your running and get jacked and strong at the same time, for example. When you're sending your body mixed signals, you just get less of a signal for each of them. So for the most part, you want to be doing strength work to build your strength or muscle or whatever, or combination. And then you want to be doing conditioning work to build your conditioning. And of course, power, mobility, all that kind of stuff is still important too. You should do those. And you can incorporate those into your training sessions. But again, separate usually from the strength work, separate from the conditioning work, because they're all different adaptations. Number 7, you like using machines? That's fine. They're great training tools and not impure. Again, going back to the machine thing versus free weights thing, I used to, coming up as a early internet forum age trainee that got all my information from T-Nation, bodybuilding.com, certain other forums on the internet growing up. Most people were very, very quick to bash on machines. Like, machines make you super unathletic. They're just bodybuilding. They're not functional. I talked a little bit about functional in my last episode. Anything that makes you more fit, so whether it's more strong, more athletic, run faster, more muscular, more powerful, more resilient to injury, is going to be functional. Even if it's not something that perfectly mimics daily life or perfectly mimics what you do at selection, it's still functional because it's improving your function as a human by making you stronger or more fit in some way. So machines can do that. They're actually really good at that. And some of the newer machines are incredibly good at that. And plenty of studies have come out to support that you're not going to become less athletic. You're not going to become less capable. You're not going to become more injury prone by using machines. I'm not saying that you should only use machines. I'm also not saying you should only use free weights. I used to think that you should only use free weights. And even though I enjoyed getting a pump using like cables and stuff like that, I still would rarely let myself be seen doing that kind of stuff. And now I use probably 75-25 machines over free weights, and I feel way better. I make more reliable gains. My joints don't talk to me quite as often because I find machines that are really good for my structure and my goals and my preferences. And it works really well. And you can just focus on targeting one part of your body or a couple different parts of your body. You can still, a lot of people think you can't do compound lifts on machines. Yes, you can do compound lifts on machines. Compound lifts are basically movements that target more than one body group, more than one muscle group in the body. So a belt squat or a leg press will target the quads. It'll target the adductors. It'll target the glutes, all of those different muscles. And then it'll secondarily target some other muscles as well. So machines are totally fine. I wouldn't do all of your training on machines. There are certain exercises that just lend themselves better to machines. There's certain people who would be better off using machines more often than free weights. There are other people who would probably be better off using more free weights than machines, but neither of them are off limits. So don't be dogmatic about what you choose to get the job done. They're all tools. Having a good, solid arsenal of tools is always a good thing. Number 8, this is another one someone asked about. If you keep doing burpees while the rowers and bikes collect dust next to you, you'll be embarrassed in 14 years. Yep. So I used to think the burpee was just the best of all worlds in regards to building strength, muscle, and condition, and your aerobic conditioning. And that's not the case. Unless your goal is to get really good at burpees, doing burpees while these pristine $1,000 cardio machines sit right next to you is missing the forest for the trees. Burpees, yes, they are hard. They'll get your heart rate up. They will make you sore. They sometimes might smash your joints if you do burpees like the way most people do burpees. They're not as good as sitting on a rower or sitting on a bike or going for a run or whatever other standard form of cardio you can think of for conditioning, especially if you want to get good at one of those things I just listed. If you're trying to get good at running and you think that burpees are going to get you there, then you're mistaken. They're not. They're going to make you generally a little bit more aerobically fit, but they're not going to improve your running. If you're trying to get good at rowing, sitting on a rower is where you want to make most of your money, where you're going to make most of your money. So nothing wrong with occasionally doing some burpees. Nothing wrong with if you have no access to any other equipment and you want to do some burpees and you actually go through and do a solid push-up, a solid squat jump, and go back down and continue, rather than just flopping down on the floor, grinding your shoulders, doing a half-ass jump, and just completely destroying yourself. That's fine. But if you think it's going to be something that makes you fitter that you should do instead of regular conditioning, it's not. I would much rather see somebody do a superset of push-ups and squat jumps, or push-ups and air squats, or push-ups and goblet squats for the actual squat and push-up component, and then separate them, going back to a few ago when I talked about separating conditioning and strength. Do actual conditioning on a conditioning machine or running or rucking or whatever it may be. You're going to be a lot better off, and you are not going to have banged up shoulders all the time. I'm not saying everyone's going to have banged up shoulders for burpees. You can do burpees in a way that doesn't bang your shoulders up, but just most people don't, and it's not worth it. And it's not this like magic exercise that gives you everything. So number 9, Steve Prefontaine's mindset is great for motivation, but not great for optimal run progress. So for those of you who are living under a rock, Steve Prefontaine is a legendary track and field athlete. He ran for the University of Oregon, and he was an absolute savage. And he's got a lot of kind of famous quotes, but one of his quotes was, "The best pace is a suicide pace, and today is a good day to die," which gives me goosebumps when I say that quote and I think about it, because it's fucking savage. But if all you do, and that's what he did in training, he just ran himself into the ground. He would go out and get drunk, get up the next morning and run his hangover off. And I'm going to get to that one here in a second. And he would just grind, and he would just leave people in the dust in practice. Didn't matter if it was a training session or if it was an actual race, and he got away with it. Would he have been better if he had more structured training and probably a better lifestyle? Most likely, he probably would have been, but he got away with it. Just because he got away with it doesn't mean it's the best, and doesn't mean that other people should think that they can get away with it. Again, if you haven't watched any sort of Steve Prefontaine documentaries, or if you haven't read about him, I would read about him. He's a super motivating dude. He was an absolute savage, and he would just take people's souls that he was about to run against, and then he would just go smash them. And he's very inspiring, so you can get inspiration from him. But I would not try and mimic his training philosophies and his training styles, because you probably will run yourself into the ground. And it took me a little while to learn this, but I also came to the realization that if I just run as hard as I can every single time I run, I am probably going to hurt myself and not get as good as I otherwise could. So Steve Prefontaine, use him for motivation, not necessarily for running advice. Next one, 12 beers, 9 slices of pizza, and late night meat in tube form is not an optimal carb load strategy. All right, so my lifestyle back in my early 20s was what I would consider far from ideal. And although, again, I got away with it because I was young, resilient, and I trained hard. And even though I would go out and drink way too much and eat way too much shitty food and make poor decisions, I didn't use it as an excuse to like not be in shape or not be fit, not train. If I woke up hungover, I'll get into this in a second, but if I woke up hungover, I would still train, no big deal. As I continued to get a little bit older and wiser, I realized that that was not serving me. It didn't really click fully till like my late 20s, when I really started to notice that when I went out and partied the next day, I would be better served not training and just relaxing and waiting till the next day to train. And so I started doing that. But for a while, I would just train. Oftentimes I would leave my car in like downtown Fayetteville after a night out. I would drive there, and then of course drink way too much to drive home. So I at least made good decisions about drinking and driving. And we would get a taxi or whatever, a ride home. And the next day I would have my keys and I would run from my barracks into downtown Fayetteville, 9, 10, sometimes up to 12 miles to go and get my car and drive home. So again, kind of funny and a little bit psycho to look back on, but not something I would recommend. And just because beer, pizza, and meat in tube form, like a hot dog stand hot dog, may have some carbs in it, it's not the ideal night before a hard workout fueling strategy. So I would lean towards doing an actual carb load if you need to, or just being reasonable with your decisions on weekends. I'm not saying that you can't party a good amount and get it done, because I did, and a lot of other Green Berets do. But looking back on it, I'm almost 2 years sober, and I absolutely cannot imagine going out and doing that and then getting up the next day and doing anything useful. So just some words of advice. Number 11, along the same lines, Instead of trying to train the hangover out of you, try avoiding them in the first place. That one does not need a lot of explanation. If you want to avoid having to train through hangovers, the best way to do it, the top way, at least the one that I have found, is to not get hungover in the first place. And the best way to do that, last time I checked, and really the only way I know how to not get hungover, I know some people can go out and drink and get hungover, or not get hungover and not feel it, which is used to kind of be me, but not necessarily anymore. Definitely not anymore, at least not that I'm aware of. That's mainly why I stopped drinking, is because I hated the way I felt the next day. But the best way to avoid getting hangovers is to not drink. And again, I'm not saying don't drink at all, but just make good decisions. And if you are thinking, shit, how am I going to train? If you have a really important training session coming up and you also think that you're going to go out the night before and you're trying to game plan, how am I going to get this training session in the way I want to, despite the fact that I'm going out drinking the night before? The easiest answer is to not go out drinking the night before. I have never once in my life regretted not going out drinking till 2 a.m. I have at least 150 times, probably way more than that. I'm probably being very generous with that. Woke up the next day after a night of drinking till 2 a.m. and regretted it. So hopefully, for what it's worth, that helps your decision-making process when it comes to how to manage training and being hungover or lack of a hangover. Number 12, the things that instill a sense of fear are the things that you need to be pursuing. This one also took me a while. I usually used to pursue things that I would have a little bit of fear towards, like pursuing going in as an 18 X-ray. Definitely was a fearful thing. It was an uncertain thing. It was full of worry and what ifs. But other than that, I did not do a lot of things that put me outside my comfort zone. And that was kind of a hard lesson to learn over the years, that pretty much every time I approached something fearful, on the other side of that, even if the other side of that is like continuous, even if it's like an infinite game, that is where the real value is. That's where the real meaning is. So if you're only doing things that you're comfortable with, things that don't strike fear in you whatsoever in any way, then you're probably just going to have a life full of mediocre moments. And in my opinion, that's not a very fulfilling way to live. So when things give you fear, when you feel a little bit of uncertainty, or whoa, that's a pretty big thing, like I don't know about that, that is a pretty good sign that you should pursue that thing. Not always. If it's like jumping off a cliff, of course, that's an exception. If you're fearful of jumping off a cliff, I wouldn't jump off a cliff. But you kind of get the picture. Like if there's a big project or a big venture or a big goal that you're trying to chase and it strikes fear in you, then that's a pretty good sign that it's a good goal and worth pursuing. Number 13, you're always going to feel unprepared. Embrace it and perform anyway. No matter what, you're going to always have a sense of imposter syndrome. You're going to have a sense of, I don't think I prepared enough. You're going to have a sense of, I feel like I could do more, or I feel like I could have done more. Like if it's the day before selection and you're looking back on your training, you're probably going to feel like, I feel like I could have done more or better throughout that. Even if you did everything you possibly could in your control, you're probably going to feel like that. And I would do that. I would absolutely take every possible step of the process that will prepare you fully for whatever your endeavor is. But you're still going to feel, especially if you care, and especially if you're a high achiever and you hold yourself to super high standards, you're still going to feel like you could have done more and you're slightly underprepared. But when you continue to just go out and get the job done and perform, you start building up this big stack of evidence that you are still capable, even if you don't feel 100% confident or prepared or whatever, you're still capable of getting it done at a high level. If you have that in the back of your mind and you let it crush you and you let it affect your performance, or you let it affect the way you approach things, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a game, race, selection event, whatever it may be, then it's going to likely detract from your overall performance and therefore not really help you stack that evidence for future performances. So being fully prepared is very important. You want to take all the steps necessary to prepare yourself as adequately for whatever you're doing as possible. Rehearse, plan, prepare, bounce back from failures along the way, and course correct. But even if you don't feel like you're fully prepared right before it happens, that doesn't mean you aren't fully prepared. That just means you're normal and you're a human, and that's the way you're wired, and you still got to go out and do it anyway. Number 14, you should prioritize full range of motion lifting instead of half-assed mobility work and shortened partials. So I've said this a lot, and I'll say it again. The best way to improve your mobility is to lift weights with a full range of motion. Now, that's not enough for everybody. A lot of people, to include me, need a little bit of extra targeted mobility work. But a lot of people also think that if they do all this extra mobility work on the side, whatever your definition of mobility work is, a lot of people think it's just like stretching, stuff like that, whatever you're doing on the side to improve your mobility or your flexibility. And then you're going into the gym and not lifting with full range of motion. Even worse, doing shortened partials in the shortened position of the muscle, which is the least important part of the movement for muscle growth. So think of doing a half squat or benching, but you come down to like 4 inches off your chest, or you're doing a pull up, but your head doesn't even get above the bar, things like that. Actually, that's more of a lengthened partial. A shortened partial on a pull up would be your head is above the bar, but you only go down like halfway. You don't go down to even close to the dead hang. That would be a shortened partial. And that's going to detract from your mobility. And it's also going to detract from the results that you get from that actual exercise in regards to strength and muscle gain. So prioritize full range of motion first, lifting, even if that means dropping a little bit of weight for now while you get the movement pattern and the correct execution down, and then adding weight after that. And then whatever that doesn't cover for your mobility, or whatever restrictions you continue to have because you either don't have it genetically or you just need a little bit more work, that's fine. Then you can do mobility there. But if you're spending longer on mobility than actual training throughout the week, on a given week, you are backwards with your priorities. Your training should be mostly getting you better, stronger, faster, more muscular, more powerful, whatever it may be, and then a little bit of mobility to kind of tie up those loose ends. Next one, have more conversations with strangers. Hi, how are you? Does not count. Yeah, so going back to the character thing, I used to not be great in social situations, especially with strangers. I always have been like kind of self-conscious of myself and not really a good conversationalist. And I've done a lot of work. First I had to identify it. B, I had to learn how to fix it. So reading multiple different books, How to Win Friends, Influence People is a great one. How to Talk to Anyone is a great one. The Charisma Myth is another great one. Crucial Conversations is another great one. Those are just 4. There's a lot of other ones too. And then pretty much every book you read or every activity resource that you go to learn how to fix these things will give you some sort of action step to take. And in my case, the action step that worked best for me, guess what, was going and starting conversations with strangers, and actual conversations that you talk back and forth for a couple of minutes. And most of the time, if you're a charismatic individual and you're a good conversationalist and you know what you're doing, these books that I just recommended would absolutely tell you how to be a good conversationalist and charismatic. You're going to find that you don't do most of the talking. Oftentimes the other person does most of the talking. People like to talk about themselves. And if you make them feel special by asking them targeted questions about what they're telling you and carrying that conversation, then they're going to feel really good walking away. They're going to walk away from you with a good sense of, they're just going to feel good about themselves. And they're also going to think that you're a really good person and a really, really cool person to be around and intriguing and all that kind of stuff. So to be interesting, be interested. That is the biggest tip I can give you on interacting with people, whether they're strangers or not, whatever the type of conversation is, whether it's a really intense conversation or whether you're talking to the cashier at the grocery store. But that is one thing that I really had to step outside of my comfort zone and do for a while. And I still do it, but now it's not really uncomfortable for me. And that has helped me a ton with my ability to just interact with people. Next question, or not next question. Next one is, your running background helps, but it's not everything. What is your 12-mile rut time? So of course, being good at running is a great attribute to have to go to selection, be successful, but running's not everything. And there are plenty of people who are really good runners that are just too weak to put a ruck on their back and ruck with the same prowess or anything close to the same prowess of their running ability. So make sure that you are not just a runner. You're also a good rucker, Coincidentally, I was probably better at rucking than I was at running, but that's because I worked at it and I wasn't like a superstar runner. So I had enough strength going into when I started rucking that it was a pretty easy transfer. So even if people could beat me at runs, I usually could beat like smaller, skinnier runner type guys at rucks. So just something to make sure of before you're going to selection, that you're not just a one trick pony and that you can run, ruck, and you have enough strength. Next one. This one's very important. You need to get uncomfortable more. Brutal training isn't everyone's comfort zone, but it's yours. I'm talking to myself here. So that doesn't count. Find something else. So a lot of people think that the things that most people find uncomfortable, if they do those a lot, they're also toughening themselves up, like mental fortitude wise. And that's not exactly the case. What's really uncomfortable and really brutal for some people, and just a complete, absolute, almost insurmountable obstacle for one person, may be like the thing that you love doing the most. So I used to absolutely love just crushing myself in ridiculous training sessions. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but that's just the case. And so I thought I was making myself super tough by doing this extra training and continuing and going one more mile, going a little faster, doing one more rep, doing one more set. I'm getting tougher. I'm getting tougher. One, that's not a great way to build physical capability because you just end up overdoing it. Two, if you're comfortable doing that, if you enjoy that, if that's a habit for you, especially if you just go to the gym and train every day because it's a habit, then that's not building your mental toughness. It doesn't take there's no resistance that you have to overcome in order to do that. So you have to find something different, even though other people will meet resistance doing that and it's difficult for them. You have to find something different that's difficult for you, and you have to do that. And that was something that took me a long time to learn, but it is definitely true. So something to consider. If you love training, doing extra training is not going to make you more mentally tough. It probably will just make you a little bit less fit and more banged up. And you need to find something different that makes you tougher. Next one. Rest days don't set you back. They do the exact opposite. Take them. So I used to pride myself on rarely, if ever, taking rest days. I went like 500 something days in a row without taking a rest day. And I thought that was like a good thing and something to be super proud of. And although it's good to be consistent and it's good to put streaks together, and you could absolutely just do some sort of training every day if you are intentional and measured with the intensity, the volume, and all that kind of stuff. But if you have performance goals, taking rest days is a non-negotiable. You don't improve while you're training. You give yourself a stimulus from the training, and then you improve, you grow, you adapt, you get better, you go past your previous baseline while you are not training. So you recover and then you adapt outside the gym. While you're sleeping, while you're eating, while you're resting, whatever it may be, that's when you adapt. So if you're always training, you never give yourself any time to do that, then you're not setting yourself back. You are setting yourself back. You're not setting yourself up for success. So I used to say like, oh, well, while those guys are resting, I'm up training. And I used to wake up super early in the morning to train just to get that mental edge. And there can be pros and cons to that. But at the same time, the irony is that while other people were resting, I should have been resting and I would have gotten better results from it. And I would have been less banged up. And even though I'm not saying that this like destroyed my fitness career or destroyed my SOF career, of course, I'm sitting here today after 12 years in SOF and I performed really well and I was highly physically capable throughout my career, but I could have been even more and I could have done it in a less painful way had I just taken more rest days. Now I take plenty of rest days and I feel a lot better and I perform really well too. Not as well as I used to, but I also just don't have those goals. So definitely take rest days. They're not a sign of weakness. Next one, practice being socially comfortable without booze. It'll pay off in 12 years when you quit. Yeah, so pretty much every social situation that I used to get myself into after the hours of 5 p.m., other than like the work day, being social at work and training and all that kind of stuff, would have a booze theme to it. I would drink beer. I would go out drinking with my buddies. I would drink on Saturdays. I would drink on Sundays. And going back to that last one or a couple ago when I talked about how I was uncomfortable in social situations and I had to force myself to become comfortable by actually doing it, I used alcohol to kind of calm my nerves and be more sociable and be more interesting and be more lively. And that is what I would consider a crutch. And until, again, almost 2 years ago, I'm like 2 weeks away from my 2-year anniversary of not drinking. And I just find it very important to make sure that even if you do like to go out and tie one on, or even if you do like to have some social drinks once in a while, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's not helping you, but it's not something that you can't do and still be successful. But make sure that you can do it without the booze and that you're not using it as a crutch. And this goes for really any substance. If you have any sort of substance that you need in order to talk to people, be confident, not be super anxious, or you need some sort of substance to turn your brain off or whatever it may be. Of course, if you have a problem with it, I highly suggest going and getting help or doing the work yourself. Some people can do the work themselves. I was not like a full-blown alcoholic in so much as it made me a dangerous person, or it made me hurt anyone, or it made me hurt myself. I was pretty responsible when I drank, but I definitely relied on it in lots of situations. And I used to drink almost every single night, a drink or two, and then I would drink a lot more on weekends. And so it was definitely a crutch for me. It was something I relied on to change my state. And that is, in my opinion, just not the best way to go about life. So that was a tip to myself a long time ago, way before I ever would have dreamed of the fact that I would be sober and not drinking. But it's just something to consider. And even when I first stopped drinking, I was a little bit awkward. I had to do some work and like really assess myself and review my performance when I would go out in social situations and talk to people when I was sober. And I didn't enjoy them as much just because I was always in my head kind of thinking like, why am I the awkward one not drinking? But after a while, you get used to it and you get better at those situations and you don't feel like the weirdo for not drinking anymore. Drinking is one of those weird things that you literally are the odd man out. It's becoming a little less so these days, but you are the odd man out if you decide not to put a poisonous, toxic substance into your body that makes you feel good temporarily and then makes you feel absolutely terrible afterwards. It's kind of this weird thing. Like, no one's going to give you shit for not using cocaine. No one's going to give you shit for not shooting up heroin. No one's going to give you shit for not smoking a cigarette. Not saying those are all exactly the same, but it's a similar concept. So it is one of those weird things, and it's weird when you first stop drinking, especially when the people you hang out with still do, or you used to drink with a lot of people and then you're the guy who stops drinking. That can be kind of just a weird thing for a little while. But oftentimes a lot of people will stop drinking. I've got a bunch of friends who drink either way less or not at all since I stopped drinking. And I'm not saying I'm some sort of like world-changing, life-changing person. I just stopped drinking, and then coincidentally, a lot of people who hang out with me stop drinking too, or they just drink less. And it's awesome. I love it. So whether you drink or not, or whether you have a plan of quitting drinking at some point in the future, just make sure that you can still handle yourself well in situations without the blanket of alcohol or other substances. Next one, you're a little too lean. You're going to be cold if you go in the winter, which I did. Eat another burger. Yeah, so I used to be quite lean. I still am lean, probably about the same level of leanness as I was when I went to selection back in 2012, probably about 9% body fat, maybe 8. And that's a little bit more lean than I suggest going, especially if you're going in the winter. Different people can perform really well and feel really good at different body fats. For some people, getting below 10% is A, an absolute chore, and B, they don't feel good, and C, their blood work kind of takes a turn for the worse. Their hormones aren't great, etc. Other people can feel great at 7% or 8%. For me, if I get below 8, I start to feel a little bit lethargic. I don't have good workouts, and I'm usually cold, and I don't feel as good. Probably my thyroid gets affected. My hormones might get affected as well. I haven't taken I have not had blood drawn at under 8%, so I'm not exactly sure, but just subjectively, that's how I feel. But either way, I went to selection probably around 9%, and I went in February. So although I performed fine, I didn't feel like I was too lean to perform well. I definitely felt really cold. And because when you're under 10% body fat, you're going to be cold if you go in the wintertime, and there's just no real way around that. But generally, I would find a good solid body fat percentage somewhere in the 10 to 15% range that you feel best at, perform best at, and that you can actually maintain with some semblance of a relatively normal life and shoot for that. Being over 15 is not the end of the world. Plenty of people have been selected at 18, 19, 20% body fat, but it's certainly not helping you. And you would probably benefit from getting a little bit leaner. Just don't get too lean, and just be mindful of the fact, if you're going in the wintertime, having a little bit of extra body fat on you that doesn't hinder your performance and is gained in a very methodical and slow manner while you're still training, not like take a bunch of time off, get fat, and then start training again. Simple stuff like that is something to consider. 22, you feel your quads more in a belt squat than a back squat because your femurs are really long. Use the belt squat. It's okay. Back to this machine thing and the squat thing. I'm just not built very well for squats. I have very long femurs, and my squat, in order for me to get deep with a bar on my back, I need to be pretty bent over. It's kind of like a good morning squat, which is fine. Not a big deal. If you like squatting and you feel good that way, or you're a power lifter or something like that, lots of very, very strong power lifters squat like that because they have longer femurs, and that's really the only option for them. But if you're not a power lifter and you love a belt squat or a pendulum squat or a leg press or really any other machine, or you like the safety bar, or you like to do front squats and they feel better for you, you can get deeper and you get really good stimulus from them and you don't get banged up from them, then absolutely do it. Even if it's a machine, I promise you're going to be okay. Next one, 23, read more books, listen to more podcasts on long drives instead of solely music. I didn't start listening to podcasts or audiobooks until I was probably 27. I think the first podcast I ever listened to was on my cross-country drive from when I PCS'd from Colorado, 10th group, to when I got to PCS to Fort Bragg for OTC. And I don't remember. I want to say it was like the Tim Ferriss show. Of course, I probably started with Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, like a lot of new podcast listeners do. And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe what I've been missing all this time. Like, why not spend these long road trips or long walks or long easy runs or time when you're really not doing much learning? And ever since then, I've been hooked. I listen to music still when I do certain work. If I'm doing work that doesn't involve like a lot of very fine details, typing and stuff like that, if I'm doing some other sort of work like programming, I'll listen to music. If I am lifting, I usually listen to music sometimes, usually like 50-50. But aside from that, I only listen to podcasts. I only listen to audiobooks. And I just feel like it's a great way to multitask. Even though most things don't lend themselves well to multitasking, driving and listening to a podcast is a great way to multitask. And you can learn so much. If you have an hour total commute, half an hour into work, half an hour home from work, that's an hour a day. That's 7 hours per week of learning. So I think that's a really good way to spend your time. And then reading books is another one. I used to read some like fiction books, and that's fine. Reading fiction is great. Nothing wrong with that at all. And I still do read fiction, but not as much as nonfiction. And reading is one of those things where you can spend your time doing something that isn't necessarily productivity, but actually is very productive. Especially if you're reading nonfiction, you're learning things, just like listening to a podcast or an audiobook. You feel maybe like you're not actually being productive because you're not producing, but you are expanding your knowledge, you're expanding your skill set, you're expanding your ability to see things from different perspectives. And it is a great way to spend your time. And now I have reading habits. I read for at least 30 minutes a day, usually 60. And I don't plan on stopping anytime soon, but it's just never something I really used to do. I used to spend a lot of time doing the next one, scrolling and watching Netflix. So 24, scroll less and watch Netflix less. When I was in the Q course, I don't know if it's still like this, but it might be. There was a lot of what's called holdover or awaiting training, AT, in between phases. So I would have like weeks on end between phases where you just go to formation a couple times a day and maybe go on some random details, area beautification, stuff like that. But aside from that, you aren't really doing much other than training, sleeping, eating, and hanging out wherever, doing whatever. And so I would just watch Netflix series after Netflix series. I would scroll like no other. This was before I had Instagram. I never got Instagram until I was like in like 2015. But Facebook, dating apps back when I was like single, just the Chive, if anyone remembers the Chive, just a lot of unproductive and things that are okay to do for a little while, but they're just going to drain your dopamine. They're going to drain your motivation. They're going to make you distracted. They might make you anxious and depressed because you're going to see all these perfect lives, quote unquote, from other people on the internet. And you would be better off at least being very measured and deliberate and disciplined about your binge watching, binge scrolling, death scrolling habits. So read more, listen to more podcasts, listen to more books, scroll less, and watch less Netflix. But it's okay to do those things once in a while, so long as you are deliberate with it. That was 2, but that's kind of wrapping up those last 2. 25, sleep matters even when you're still young. Stop treating it like an inconvenience. Yeah, another one that took me way too long to figure out. Of course, I was drinking all the time. So if you claim to value your sleep, yet you still drink, then those are literally oxymorons. You can't be really, really focused on your sleep and then also drink on a regular basis. They just don't match up to each other. Your actions do not line up with your actual words, the things you say you prioritize. And that was me. I was like, I really want to sleep better, but for whatever reason, I can't figure out why I can't sleep. And it was because my sleep was all over the place and I didn't prioritize it. I would do the things I just mentioned, scroll and watch Netflix right up till I wanted to go to bed. And newsflash, when your brain is super active and you're getting all these dopamine hits, it's increasing your stress hormone, cortisol. Cortisol kind of competes with melatonin, and therefore you are not going to fall into a nice, deep, restful sleep. So I never started getting consistent sleep, like with an hour and a half to 2.5 hours of deep sleep, 2 hours of REM sleep, et cetera, like I get today, until I stopped going to bed at random times and I stopped drinking and I started to actually prepare for sleep by doing the right things throughout the day and leading up to bedtime in order to prepare for sleep. And either you eventually learn that and you benefit from it and you never want to go back to your old ways. But some people, to be honest, continue to go about life in a sleep deprived state and they just don't know what they could feel like if they prioritize sleep more. And so I don't think it's ever too early to start prioritizing it and really thinking about it and actually taking the action steps and making the sacrifices required to get better sleep, because it is going to change your life in lots and lots of ways and not a single one of them are bad. So just something to consider. 26, just because you were born in the same town as someone or drank at the same bar as someone does not mean you're required to be friends. This one is huge. You might find as you go on your journey to your next big chapter in life, whether it's going to soft selection or whatever it is, that there are certain people that you used to acquaint yourself with or even call friends that don't have the same life disposition as you. They don't have, and we're going to get into this here in a second, but they don't have the same goals. They don't have the same ambition. And in fact, when they see you doing big things and improving yourself and taking that big next risk in your life to be better, it makes them, whether consciously or subconsciously, look at themselves in the mirror and be like, dang, I could do something like this, but I choose not to. And oftentimes those people start resenting you for it, or they start undermining your goals, whether it's like covertly or overtly, just kind of, are you sure you want to do that? Come on, man. You want to live a little? Like, one beer is not going to hurt you. One night out's not going to hurt you. You're going to be okay. You're super dialed in otherwise. Those little things, they add up. So just because someone was born in the same town as you, just because even someone has the same parents as you, just because someone gave birth to you. I have a great relationship with my mom, but I know not everyone does. And sometimes those people will drag you down if you let them. And letting other people drag you down, especially if they don't want anything to do with your life trajectory or your goals and they don't support you, is just a massive failure. So this is a hard thing for a lot of people, especially when they first start, because they're not to the level yet where they have all those new friends that have similar mindsets. Chris Williamson in Modern Wisdom talks about it. It's the lonely chapter, I believe. Essentially, you start doing things that are going to take you to the next level in whatever development you're going for, whether it's business, fitness, getting healthy, approaching soft selection, whatever it is. So the friends that you're leaving behind, you're no longer friends with them, but you haven't made it to the level yet where you actually have friends on the level that you're going to get. So you're right in between there. And that's the lonely chapter. And it's a thing for a lot of people. And it's tough. It's not difficult. I mean, it's very difficult. And it's something that you're going to have to endure. But if you just keep working at it and keep leaving those people in the rearview mirror, or at least minimally interacting with them as best you can, you're going to eventually get to where you're going to start meeting people who are like-minded and have the same goals as you and have the same drive and determination, and they actually build you up and support you. So you're not required to be friends with anyone, no matter what. You're not required to spend time with anyone. You're not required to answer to anyone that you don't want to. So make sure you choose those people wisely. Along the same lines, hang out with people who push you to be better and share your general disposition in life. Pretty much just talked about that, but the more people that you can get around that are on your same path or a very similar path, or even better, people who have the next one, find someone who has been where you want to be and go learn from them. If you can find people like that are further along than you, that are higher up than you, whether you're trying to be an SF and you find an SF guy to almost go under his wing and get mentorship from, or if you were trying to make it big in business and you are able to go to seminars or cold call or cold email people who have already achieved what you wanted to achieve. Or even if someone is online, that's the great thing about the internet right now, is there's so many people online that no matter what you're trying to pursue, likely there's someone who has pursued it and has successfully pursued it and is way further ahead and is willing enough and generous enough to actually share their tips with you. So you can follow people on YouTube, Instagram, podcasts, whatever it may be. And I mean, that's partially my goal, is to be a good example for the next generation of SF. And whether we work together or not, provide some mentorship through the podcast, through my content on Instagram. And finding people like that is massive, and it will greatly increase your chances of success, because you're going to find that along the way, you're going to run into speed bumps and obstacles and times you want to quit. And if you have a person that has been there and been through that stuff before, and you can lean on them and ask them, or just learn from what they did to get through all those shitty situations and come out the other side successful, then that is a massive thing. So start seeking those people out and start surrounding yourself the best you can with people that share the same disposition as you, the same outlook on life, the same goals, or very similar goals, or at least goals to do bigger and better things, even if it's a different thing than you. 29, party less. If you succeed in this endeavor, it'll be despite your lifestyle, not because of it. Already kind of beaten this one up throughout, but partying is, again, something that I did and I got through it and I made it, and plenty of people have. However, just something to consider, probably not going to help you all that much. A lot of people have their SF careers squashed by going out and doing dumb shit on the weekends, whether it's drinking and driving, getting in fights in the bar, domestic violence, whatever it may be. Just be very cautious and very calculated about your decisions to go out and party. Don't use drugs that could end up in your system that you could get caught for and kicked out for, and never show up to work partially intoxicated or anything like that. Make sure you just make good decisions around that. 30, nutrition should not be an afterthought. You'd perform better if you ate better. Again, I really just did not have the best nutrition habits. I knew exactly what I should be doing. I knew exactly what I should be eating. I knew the right foods. And to be honest with you, most people know the right foods. They just, whether it's a discipline thing or a habit thing or a mental lapse weakness thing, they still don't make the right decisions. And I'm not saying that you have to be a saint. And I'm not saying that you should eliminate all forms of processed foods or anything like that. But just know that the better fuel you put into your body, the better you're going to feel, the better you're going to look, the better you're going to perform. There's really no way around that. Certain people can get away with things, especially when they're younger, especially when they're insanely active. I got away with things, as in it didn't detract from my performance as much as, maybe it absolutely would today. It didn't make me fat. I wasn't overweight. I had solid body composition, but all that stuff could have been better. My health could have been better as well. And I would have felt better throughout the day had I taken nutrition more seriously and didn't just wing it. I ate a lot of food. I ate plenty of protein, plenty of carbohydrates, but it was just not the best composition of high quality nutrient dense foods. So nutrition is important no matter how old you are. And the sooner you can kind of learn that and develop good habits around your nutrition, the better you're going to be. All right, we're down to the last 5. Plain water on long runs and rucks is slightly better than nothing at best. Try some carbs and salt. Basic fueling your workouts 101. will show you and tell you that just drinking water, which a lot of people do, which I used to do, is not going to really serve you all that much when you're sweating. When you sweat, newsflash, you lose more than just water. You also lose electrolytes, mainly while training, you lose sodium. So you want to enter your training sessions, approach your training sessions well hydrated with electrolytes and water. You also want to maintain hydration the best you can, or fight dehydration, usually is what it is when you're running and rucking. You're not going to be able to drink back 1-to-1 all the sweat that you lost and all the electrolytes you lost, but at least drinking some back so that you're not super dehydrated and it's really detracting from your performance and potentially making it kind of dangerous depending on what the weather's like and a bunch of other factors that could cause you to be like a heat casualty. But salt, water are very important around training, as well as if you're going longer. I've talked about this a million times, but if you're going longer than 75-ish minutes, run or ruck, you're going to perform better if you have some sort of carbs before, during, and after that training session. But during is kind of where of course I ate before and I ate after, but I just completely disregarded during, even on long runs and long rucks. And I would perform really well for about 90 minutes or so. And then sometimes I would hit the wall because I had basically run through my glycogen stores and was running on fumes. And that's the classic bonking that a lot of people will describe, where you just pretty much run out of glycogen stores and your body is really struggling and your pace goes from crushing it, you feel great, to I just hit a wall and I am going to hang on for dear life. So really simple stuff, some quick digesting carbohydrates, whether it's in liquid form, solid form, usually like a runner goo or gummies or something along those lines, and some salt or a combination of those things. You can get a beverage like Tailwind that has salt. You mix it with water and it also has carbs. So it's like all three in one. Something along those lines is going to do you way better than just water. Number 32, learn about more things than just fitness and your day job. I kind of somewhat recently have been diving into learning more things about general aspects of life than just my job. Right now, my job obviously is a fitness coach. So a lot of my continued education is in the fitness field, strength and conditioning, nutrition, whatever it may be. But when I was in, pretty much the only thing I cared about was my job as a Green Beret, as an 18 Delta, as an ODA member, and fitness, of course, because I have always loved fitness. And I knew I wanted to do this after I got out. But I also think it's very important to expand your knowledge field and learn about things that you maybe never thought you'd be interested in, but you might start learning about them and find they're really cool. For me, recently, I've been reading a shit ton and watching documentaries on World War II. I thought I knew a lot about World War II, but until the last few months when I read about it like almost every day, I had no idea. So super cool, intriguing things to learn about. And it's just going to make you a more balanced human being. It's going to spread your knowledge base. And I've also been learning a lot about business. Yes, I run my own business, but I'm not like a business pro. I am a lot better at the fitness X's and O's than the business X's and O's and the business strategy. So I've been learning a ton about that as well. And that's super intriguing, and it's expanding my knowledge base, and it's going to make me more successful at some point in my life, hopefully. So I think it's really important to kind of venture out from the things that you like to read and study and learn about and focus on all the time, and go and learn something that maybe you never thought you'd be interested in. And you might just find that it's really cool, or you might not find it's cool and you can move on to another thing. Either one is totally fine. But I think just being a more well-rounded individual is a good life trait. 33, be more present. Thinking about the future is a great feature, but doing it 24/7 will drive you insane. Yeah, so if you're anything like me, you probably are in your own head a lot and you think about things in the future quite often. And that's a really good thing. Planning for the future and strategizing for the future is a really good thing. That's why I call it a feature. It's not a bug. It's not something that you should just stop doing. Turns out plenty of people don't think about the future ever, and they're just always present. Usually those people are totally fine with like pretty much everything. They don't really have like big goals. They're not driven, which is totally fine. They're content, and that's awesome. I'm just not like that. And I know that if you're pursuing a career in SOF, you're also not like that. So if you possibly can, improve your ability to be present at certain moments throughout your life, throughout the day, and actually practice it, you are going to not be as anxious. You're not going to be as worried. You're not going to have as much uncertainty about the future. And you're going to actually allow yourself to enjoy what is going on right now. All the things I'm thinking about in the future end up being in the present at some point. And when I'm experiencing them, I'm just thinking about the future more oftentimes. When I get into a workflow, that's when I feel super present. I'm kind of in like a flow state. Doesn't happen every single time I work, but sometimes it does. And it's great. Another thing that I do every single day, no matter what, I go on one walk without my phone and I just think and I try to just be present. I oftentimes end up thinking about the future and coming up with ideas, but at least for part of that walk, I think about the surroundings, the sand underneath my feet. I think about the weather. I think about the breeze. I think about the smells, the sounds, and all that kind of stuff. And it sounds a little bit weird and like almost woo-woo, but it kind of brings you back to life and it brings you back to being grounded and in the present and takes away a little bit of the uncertainty and the fear of the future. So although thinking about the present is very difficult for a lot of people, it should be at least something that you strive towards and make sure that you're not trying to think about the future 24/7 all the time, because it is probably going to drive you insane. So that's my best advice on that one. All right, number 34. Your parents will advise you based on what they think is best for you, but that doesn't always coincide with what is actually best for you. And this goes beyond parents too. This is your friends, your siblings, really anyone. If you're getting advice from somebody who hasn't been where you've been and they're giving you advice on how you should approach your life, whatever you're going for, take that advice with a big grain of salt, because they're thinking based on their experiences. They're thinking based on their values, their worldview, and they're also thinking, especially if it's a loved one, they're thinking based on what's best for you. And oftentimes, if this person actually does support you and they're an actual loved one that is trying to help you, they're doing it because they care about you and they want to see you succeed. But if you're pursuing something that is not what most people pursue, whether it is going to SF, going to start a business, going to work in a new environment, or moving across the country, whatever you think that you need to do, whatever you're called to do at this moment that you want to do. If someone's giving you advice to not do it or to do something different or to consider this, just remember that they're giving you that advice based on their perspective, not necessarily what your perspective. They can't see your perspective. So my parents have given me amazing advice throughout my entire life, and they've always believed in me, and they have absolutely done a really good job raising me. And I love my parents a lot, but there have been times where they've given me certain advice based on their past experiences, their history, their preferences, their perspective that hasn't been in line with what I actually wanted to do. And so you just have to remember that when you're going through life. Be careful who you get advice from, especially if it's someone who hasn't done the same thing that you're looking to accomplish, and especially if they are trying to tell you to be cautious, because a lot of these things, most people don't do them because they're hard and because the chances of success are really low. But that doesn't mean that you still shouldn't do them. If you're the type of person that wants to pursue big, hard, challenging, demanding things, then you should, regardless of whether the people around you who haven't done that give you advice not to do that. So that would be my best advice on that one. Just keep that in mind. And I'm not saying that my parents tried to hold me back or give me shitty advice, but I know a lot of people's do, or wives or best friends or whatever it is. So just keep that in mind as you go through and do your thing. And if you get advice from someone who's already been there, totally different story, then I would listen to that advice. You don't necessarily have to listen to it word for word, everything they say, and follow it perfectly. But if someone's already accomplished what you want to accomplish, if they've already been through the process that you're about to get going on, then that's the advice you kind of want to listen to. So just some food for thought. Number 35, just because you can do something doesn't mean you always should. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Just because you do have all these opportunities, the later you get in life, especially when you pursue big things that really demand more of a central myopic focus, not necessarily myopic, but more like tunnel vision, like focus on the goal and the process and blocking out distractions. There's going to be a lot of things that you could do or you should do Maybe they sound really lucrative. Maybe it does sound really good to go out to the bars tonight, but I have a 12-mile ruck tomorrow. Or maybe it does sound really good to go on spring break, but I have finals that I have to study for. Or maybe it does sound really good to just take the day off and rest up, but I'm supposed to do this workout and I'm supposed to eat the way that I want to eat to support my goals. And if I take this day off, is it the end of the world? No. But is it perfectly in line with my goals? Just because I can do that does not always mean I should. And then along these same lines, anytime you hear someone say you should or you shouldn't, pay attention, because oftentimes doing the opposite can lead to something extraordinary. So you've probably heard a lot of people in your life say, oh, you should do this. Oh, no, you shouldn't do that. You should do this. Especially when you start talking about your bigger goals, things you want to pursue, things that, again, most people don't want to pursue. And from their perspective, they may not think it's the right thing. When someone says you shouldn't do something or should do something, that very well may be the exact thing you should do, because that is the thing that is going to challenge you and bring you to the next level in whatever endeavor in life we're talking about. So anytime you hear those words from someone, especially again, if it's someone that has not done the same thing that you are looking to pursue, or is not willing to also do the same thing that you're looking to pursue, pay very good attention, because that may be a very good indication that you should do the exact opposite of what they're saying you should do or shouldn't do. So that one's a little bit more ambiguous, but just something to keep in mind as you go through life, especially if you pursue big, arduous, demanding, lofty goals. A lot of people are going to tell you, maybe you shouldn't do that, or maybe you should do this instead. And if you just always listen to that, then you're not really going to get anywhere, and you're not going to be confident in yourself that you can go and pursue something and stick to it and follow it all the way through and at least give it your best shot. So always keep that in mind. Just use those words as a little bit of a cue that you might be onto something if you do the opposite of what they're telling you to do. And that's it. That's the last one. Got it done in not too bad of a time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to that. And I had a good time going through and trying to explain them. And yeah, don't forget, if you are an audio only listener and you enjoy YouTube, then I'd be honored if you check out my YouTube postings of these episodes, and feel free to leave a subscribe, share with a friend, leave a comment, leave a like. Anything helps grow the YouTube channel. That is going to be my goal throughout most of the winter, is to grow the YouTube channel. I'm going to start putting more than just the podcast and podcast clips on YouTube. I'm going to actually start making separate YouTube videos. They're going to be similar to this, just shorter, of course. They're going to be like top 10 lists and certain things like that. And I'm looking forward to it. So if you guys could help spread the word, if you like what you hear, that would be highly appreciated. So thanks, guys. Have a great one. Till next time, Terminator out.